The late shift at the Kronos Tech Tower had a certain kind of silence. It wasn't peaceful exactly. It was the hum of the air conditioning, the distant groan of the elevator machinery, and the squeak of her own cleaning cart's wheels. For the woman pushing that cart, this quiet was her world. Her name was Maya, and her life was measured out in trash bags and checklists. Her uniform was a soft gray, the kind of color that seemed to blend into the walls. The people who worked in the glittering glass offices by day barely saw her. She was just part of the building, like the potted plants or the water coolers, and that was fine by her. Being invisible meant she could do her job and get home. Home was a small apartment that always smelled a little like the lavender cleaner she used, and a lot like her 7-year-old son, Leo. He was the reason for every sore muscle, every late night. Her whole life was a tight schedule. Get Leo to school, catch her bus, work her day job at a diner, rush to the Kronos Tower for her evening cleaning shift, and finally get home just in time to kiss a sleeping boy goodnight. Her sister, who watched Leo, would give her a tired smile and head out. Then Maya would finally sit, her feet throbbing, and just breathe for a minute before starting it all over again. Tonight, she was on the 45th floor, the executive lounge. This was a different world from the cubicle farms she usually cleaned. Here, the carpets were thick enough to lose a sock in. The sofas were leather that sighed when you sat on it. One whole wall was glass, showing the city sparkling below like a spilled box of jewels. Maya didn't look at the view much. She was focused on the smudges on the glass table, the crumbs in the fancy coffee machine. She was refilling the paper towel dispenser in the small kitchenette when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Not a cough, not a sigh. It was a sharp, pained gasp, followed by a heavy thud. Her body went still. The floor was supposed to be empty. Security did a sweep. Her first, hopeful thought was that maybe someone had dropped something. A laptop bag. But the gasp replayed in her head. It was a human sound. A hurt sound. She peeked out of the kitchenette. The main lounge area was empty. The sound had come from beyond a heavy wooden door that was usually closed. The door to the big corner office. The boss's office. Her mind flashed to the man she'd only ever seen in photos on the company website or glimpsed from a distance behind a wall of serious-looking people. He was a figure in a suit, not a real person. Another sound. A low, struggling groan that Maya's heart started hammering against her ribs. Protocol said to call security. But security was downstairs, and that sound, it was the sound of someone drowning on dry land. She pulled her phone from her pocket, her fingers clumsy, and dialed the emergency number. 911? What's your emergency? A calm voice asked. I'm at the Kronos Tech Tower, 45th floor, she whispered, as if speaking too loud would make things worse. A man's in trouble. In the main office. I think he can't breathe. He fell. The dispatcher asked for the exact address. Maya's mind went blank for a second. Then she rattled it off. Is he conscious? The dispatcher asked. I don't know. I haven't gone in yet. You need to check. Help is on the way, but I need you to check on him. Can you do that? Maya took a deep breath that did nothing to calm her. Okay. She pushed the heavy door open. The office was huge, bigger than her whole apartment. The city lights glittered through another massive window. And there, on the floor between a giant desk and a bookshelf, was the man. He was on his back, one hand clutching the front of his crisp white shirt, the other scrabbling weakly at the carpet. His face was a terrible gray color like old dishwater. His eyes were wide, full of a pure, animal panic. They locked onto hers. It was him, the billionaire, the founder. In this moment, he was none of those things. He was just a man who was terribly, terrifyingly sick. Sir, Maya said, her voice trembling. She knelt beside him, the dispatcher's voice a tinny sound from her phone on the floor. Help is coming. Just hold on. But his eyes were starting to drift. They were losing focus, staring past her at the ceiling. The dispatcher was saying something about checking for a pulse. Maya fumbled for his wrist. His skin was cold and clammy. She couldn't find a beat. He's going, she said into the phone, her own panic rising. He's not looking at me anymore. The dispatcher said the ambulance was 5 minutes out. 5 minutes. The man's chest gave a funny, jerky movement and then went too still. His eyelids fluttered. Something her sister, a nurse, had said once popped into her head. Sometimes, when someone is slipping away, a strong physical stimulus can jolt them back, even for a second, just to keep them in the room long enough for help to arrive. Maya didn't think. There was no time for thinking. She didn't see a billionaire. She saw Leo's face for a split second, and the thought that this man was someone's somebody. She leaned over him. "Hey!" she said sharply. "Stay with me." He didn't respond, so she did it. She put one hand on his shoulder to steady herself, bent down, and pressed her lips firmly against his. It wasn't a romantic kiss. It was desperate and hard. A human alarm clock. She pulled back. His eyes flew open. They were blurred and confused, but they were open. He looked right at her, truly seeing her for the first time. The gray uniform, the fear on her face, the hair escaping from her ponytail. He made a small, choked sound. Not of pain, but of pure surprise. Just then, the world burst into noise. The door banged open, and the room filled with people in blue uniforms, heavy boots, and the crackle of radios. They surrounded him, pushing Maya gently but firmly out of the way. She stumbled back, her legs weak, and watched as they worked on him, cutting open his expensive shirt. Attaching pads to his chest point, one of the paramedics looked over at her, standing there small and forgotten by the bookshelf. "You the one who called it in?" Maya just nodded. "You did good," the paramedic said, before turning back to the gurney they were loading the man onto. They wheeled him out, a whirlwind of equipment and urgent voices. The door swung shut behind them. Suddenly, the office was quiet again. Just the hum of the air conditioning. The only signs of the chaos were the scissors and wrappers on the floor, and the faint, lingering smell of antiseptic and sweat. Maya looked down. Her hands were shaking. She slowly wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. She had a job to finish. The lounge still needed to be cleaned. But for a long minute, she just stood there in the middle of the giant, quiet office, feeling the echo of that shocking, life-saving kiss on her lips, and wondering if anything would ever be the same again. The next week felt like walking through thick syrup. Every movement was slow and heavy. Maya went through her days at the diner and her nights at the Kronos Tower in a daze. The memory of that night played over and over in her head, especially in the quiet darkness before sleep. The feel of his cold skin, the panic in his eyes, the shocking decision her body made before her mind could catch up. She was sure she'd be fired. She had touched the boss. She had kissed him, for heaven's sake, even if it was for a reason. People in gray uniforms didn't do things like that. They stayed in the background. She waited for the call from the building manager, for the cold dismissal. But the call that came wasn't from her supervisor. It was from a woman with a smooth, polite voice from the executive floor. "Mr. Thorne would like to express his gratitude. Would you be available to meet with him tomorrow at 10? Maya's mouth went dry. Mr. Thorne. Alistair Thorne. She'd never said his name out loud before. Felt strange on her tongue. I have my morning shift at the diner," she stammered. "We'll coordinate with your employer," the smooth voice said, as if this was a normal thing. And Maya realized, for people like Mr. Thorne, it probably was. That night, she stood in front of the small closet she shared with Leo. Nothing looked right. Her clothes were for work or for the playground or for collapsing on the couch. She didn't own anything for a meeting with a billionaire. Finally, she chose a simple blue blouse, the one she saved for parent-teacher conferences, and her one pair of black pants that weren't jeans. She polished her old shoes until they shone under the weak kitchen light. Leo, coloring at the table, watched her. "You look fancy, Mom. Like a principal." She smiled, a tight, nervous smile. "Just a meeting, baby." "With the man who got sick?" Her heart stuttered. She hadn't told him details, just that she'd helped someone at work. "Yes, with him. You should tell him to eat more vegetables," Leo said seriously, going back to his drawing. The laugh that came out of her was part relief, part terror. Walking into the Kronos Tower the next morning felt like entering a different building. The sunlight streamed through the soaring lobby windows. People in sharp suits and clicking heels moved with purpose. She felt her gray janitorial uniform, even though she wasn't wearing it, like a ghost on her skin. She gave her name at the reception, her voice a whisper. "Ah, yes. Take elevator 1 to the 45th floor. You're expected." The elevator ride was silent and too fast. The doors opened directly into a waiting area that was quieter than a library. A different woman, just as polished, smiled. "Ms. Maya? Right this way." She was led through a door, not the one to the big corner office, but to a smaller, still intimidating room with a table and soft chairs. "Mr. Thorne will be with you shortly. Can I get you some water? Coffee? Water, please," Maya managed to say. She sat on the very edge of a chair, her back straight. The door opened again, and he walked in. He was different from the man on the floor. He was pale, thinner somehow, dressed in a simple sweater and trousers. He moved carefully, like his body was a fragile thing he was still getting used to, but it was his eyes that struck her. On the floor, they had been full of wild fear. Now they were tired, deeply tired, and they looked right at her with a focus that made her want to shrink away. "Thank you for coming," he said. His voice was softer than she would have imagined. He didn't sound like a boss. He sounded like a man who had been through a storm. "It's no trouble, sir," she said, looking down at her hands in her lap. He sat down across from her, not behind the big desk. "Please, look at me." She forced her eyes up. "I don't remember much," he began slowly. "It's all fragments. The pain, the ceiling lights, and then a very determined voice telling me to stay. And then, well." He paused, and a faint, almost awkward color touched his cheeks. An unexpected but remarkably effective stimulus. Maya felt her own face grow hot. I didn't know what else to do. The dispatcher said the ambulance was minutes away, and you were fading. "You saved my life," he said plainly, the words heavy in the quiet room. The doctors were very clear. Those minutes were the difference. "What you did, it kept me here." He didn't say thank you. He said, "You saved my life." It felt bigger, heavier than thanks. "Anyone would have done it?" she mumbled, a default response. "No," he said, and there was a sudden intensity in his tired eyes. "They wouldn't have. Most people would have frozen, or called for someone else to handle it. You acted. You saw a man in trouble, not a title." He looked away, out the window, for a moment. "For a long time, I've only been a title." There was a silence. Maya didn't know what to say to that. He turned back to her. "I need to make this right. I understand you work 2 jobs. You have a son." A flicker of fear shot through her. How did he know that? Of course, he knew that. He could probably know anything he wanted with a snap of his fingers. The imbalance of it all felt huge and scary. "I do," she said, her voice gaining a little strength, a little defensiveness. He leaned forward slightly. "I am not offering you a check." That surprised her. Weren't rich people always offering checks in these situations? Money is simple, and in this case insulting. He continued, as if reading her mind. "I am offering you a job, a new position here at Kronos. It would be a facilities liaison. You would be the bridge between the people who work in this building and the people who maintain it. You know both sides better than anyone. You would have a consistent day shift, a salary that would mean you wouldn't need the diner job. Full benefits." Maya's mind went blank, then started racing. A day shift, home for dinner every night, health insurance that wasn't the bare minimum, being able to read Leo a bedtime story. It wasn't a fantasy of limousines and diamonds. It was a dream of time and sleep and security. "Why?" she asked, the words slipping out. "Why create a job for me?" "Because you have a perspective this company desperately needs and never listens to," he said. "And because it is a real, lasting thing I can do. A hand up, not a handout. That's what you'd call it, I think." He was giving her a way to earn it, to keep her pride. She saw that. It was clever, and it was kinder than a suitcase of cash. But it also meant staying here, in this world of glass and whispers where she would be visible. The woman who kissed the boss. A curiosity. She thought of Leo's small hand in hers, of the constant knot of worry in her stomach about bills, of the deep, aching tiredness in her bones. What would the salary be? She asked, her voice practical that he told her. It was more than she made in both jobs combined. It was a number that meant breathing room. It meant saving for a car that didn't rattle. It meant maybe, one day, a bigger apartment with a window in Leo's room. She looked at Alistair Thorne, really looked at him. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't a prince. He was a lonely-looking man who had almost died, trying to find a way to pay a debt that couldn't really be paid. "I'll need the schedule in writing," she said finally. "And I can't start for 2 weeks. I need to give proper notice at the diner. They've been good to me." A real smile, the first one, touched his lips, changed his whole face. "Of course, that's exactly what I'd expect you to say." He stood up, a little slowly, and extended his hand. Not to kiss, but to shake. A business agreement. Maya stood and took it. His grip was firm, but not overwhelming. "Welcome to the day shift, Maya," he said, walking out of the tower later. The autumn sun felt warmer on her face. She wasn't carrying a check, but she was carrying a future. It was fragile and terrifying, and she had no idea how to be a facilities liaison. But for the first time in a very long time, the tight wire she walked every day felt a little wider, a little safer. She pulled out her phone and called her sister. "Hey," she said, her voice catching slightly in the breeze. "You won't believe what just happened. I think things might be changing." The first month on the new job was like learning to walk in a different kind of gravity. The Kronos Tower by daylight was a completely different beast. It was louder, faster, and full of eyes. Maya's small office was a converted storage room near the building's service entrance. It had a real desk, a chair that didn't wobble, and a nameplate on the door. Felt like a disguise. People didn't know what to make of her. Some were politely distant, calling her Ms. Maya with a tight smile. Others were overly friendly, their curiosity bubbling just under the surface. She heard the whispers, snippets caught in the elevator or the break room. "That's her. The one who..." Practically a Cinderella story, but, weird. What does a facilities liaison even do? What she did initially was listen. Her job, as Alistair Thorne had vaguely defined it, was to be a bridge. So she started walking the floors, not with a cleaning cart, but with a notebook. She introduced herself to the maintenance crew first, the people she used to work beside. They were wary, thinking she'd gone over to the other side. But she asked them real questions. What broke down most often? What complaints did they hear that never got past the front desk? Which floors had the worst temperature control? Then, she'd take those notes and talk to the department heads. She didn't use jargon. She said things like, "The people on the 30th floor are wearing sweaters at their desks in July because the AC is too strong. It's making them unhappy, and it's wasting a lot of energy." Or, "The trash room on the west side doesn't have a working drain. It's becoming a health issue." Slowly, small things began to change. A repair order was fast-tracked. Thermostats were adjusted. It was practical, quiet work. She wasn't changing the world, but she was fixing the drip in the ceiling that everyone had learned to ignore. Her interactions with Alistair Thorne were rare and formal. Sometimes he'd pass her in a hallway, surrounded by a group of serious-faced people talking about Q3 projections or market saturation. He'd give her a small, acknowledging nod, and the people with him would glance at her, trying to place her. She was just another part of the building he'd nodded at. It was easier that way. The shift happened on a Wednesday. She was in his office for the first time since that night, giving a brief update on a lighting retrofit project. She was nervous, her words coming out a bit too quick. He sat behind his vast desk, listening, his fingers steepled. He looked less pale, but the tiredness around his eyes was still there. When she finished, he didn't comment on the lights. Instead, he asked, "How is your son?" The question was so unexpected, so personal, that it threw her. "He's good. Thank you. He likes his new teacher." That's important, Alistair said, and he sounded like he meant it. He glanced out at the cityscape. This building, it's full of parents. We have the on-site childcare center. Do you use it? Maya shook her head. It's for daytime employees. My son is in school. The aftercare program, it's full. There's a waiting list. So my sister picks him up. She didn't add that the cost of the company center, even with the subsidy, was still a stretch she was figuring out with her new budget. A waiting list? He turned back, a faint line between his brows. It was the look he got when a spreadsheet didn't balance. Yes, sir. It's a good program. Very popular. But it ends at 5:30. For people who work later or have a commute, it's tight. And what do they do? He asked, genuinely curious. It was a problem he'd never had to consider. They scramble, Maya said simply, her own years of scrambling giving the words weight. They pay neighborhood teens, or they have grandparents help, or they rush out of here at 4:59 every day with their hearts in their throats, hoping traffic is light. It's the most stressful part of the day. He was quiet for a moment, just looking at her. She felt like she'd said too much, been too personal about the messy realities of life that didn't belong in this clean, quiet office. Thank you for the update on the lighting, he said finally, his tone shifting back to business. You can send me the final proposal. She left, sure she'd overstepped. A week later, a company-wide email went out. It came from the head of human resources, but everyone knew the initiative came from the top. The subject line was Family Support and Flexibility Enhancements. Maya read it at her desk, her coffee cooling beside her. The on-site childcare center was expanding its hours until 7 p.m. The subsidy for lower-income employees was being significantly increased, tiered to make it truly affordable. A new pilot program for emergency backup childcare for sick kids was being launched. The email was full of corporate language about investing in our team's well-being and removing barriers to productivity, but Maya read between the lines. She saw the problem of the 5:30 scramble. She saw the tight, worried knot in a parent's stomach at 3 p.m. She sat back in her chair, a strange feeling blooming in her chest. It wasn't triumph. It was something quieter, more profound. She had mentioned a problem, not to complain, but just to answer his question. And he had heard it. Not just the words, but the stress behind them. And he had moved a giant, bureaucratic machine to fix it. Later that day, she saw him in the main lobby. He was alone for a moment, checking his phone. She walked over, her heart beating a little faster. Mr. Thorne, he looked up. Maya, is everything all right with the lighting project? The lighting's fine, she said. She took a breath. I saw the email. About the childcare. Oh, yes. It seemed like a logical efficiency improvement, he said, his tone neutral, as if discussing a software upgrade. She nodded slowly. She understood he couldn't say, you were right, it was a problem. He couldn't make it about her. But she needed him to know she understood. It will make a real difference. For a lot of people, it's a good thing. Their eyes met. Just for a second, the corporate mask slipped. She saw not the billionaire, but the man who had been given a second chance and was, in his own clumsy, powerful way, trying to pay it forward. He gave her the smallest, briefest nod of recognition. It wasn't a thank you. It was an acknowledgement that she had shown him a crack in his perfect building, and he had tried to seal it. Good, he said. Then he added, almost as an afterthought, let me know if you see anything else we're missing. He walked away, absorbed back into his world of high-stakes decisions. But something had changed. The bridge she was supposed to be building wasn't just between maintenance and management anymore. It was between two completely different ways of living, and she had just watched a very small, very important piece of it click into place. The work felt less like a disguise now, and more like a purpose. She went back to her converted storage room, closed the door, and for a minute, just smiled at the quiet walls. The new rhythm of their lives felt, for a while, like a delicate piece. Maya settled into her role. She became known as the person who got things done, the one you could talk to if the vent was rattling or the new chairs were giving everyone a sore back. She spoke plainly, and people, from the interns to the senior managers, started to appreciate it. She was no longer just the janitor who kissed the boss. She was Maya from facilities. She had earned her place at a tea home. The change was a gentle miracle. She was home for dinner every single night. She helped with homework. She could actually attend school plays on a Wednesday afternoon without having to beg for a shift swap. The constant, grinding worry in her chest had loosened its grip. She and Leo even started a new ritual: Friday night pizza and a movie on their old lumpy couch. It was ordinary, and it was everything. One Friday, Leo was drawing at the kitchen table while she sorted laundry. "What are you drawing, buddy?" "It's for your work," he said, his tongue poking out in concentration. He held it up. It was a crayon masterpiece. There was a tall stick figure in a blue shirt, Mr. Thorne, she guessed, and a smaller stick figure in gray hair. A big red heart floated between them. At the bottom, in his careful printing, it said, "Thank you for helping my mom." Maya's heart squeezed. It was sweet and innocent and completely misinterpreted the situation. But it was his truth. "Oh, honey, that's so nice. But Mr. Thorne and we just work together." "But you saved him," Leo said matter-of-factly. "So he's your friend now. You should give it to him." She didn't want to explain the complicated layers of debt, gratitude, and professional distance. So she just smiled. "It's beautiful. Let's put it on the fridge." But Leo was insistent. "No. For him. In his office. So he can see it." To avoid an argument, she gently tucked the drawing into her work folder. She'd figure it out later. Maybe she could just leave it in her own office on Monday. Distracted by a flood in a second-floor bathroom, she forgot about the folder on her desk. She came back from dealing with the plumbers to find Alistair Thorne standing in her small office doorway, the drawing in his hands. He'd been looking for a report. He saw the folder, thought it was the one he needed, and opened it. Maya froze, a hot flush of embarrassment crawling up her neck. "I'm so sorry, sir. My son drew that. He's 7. He doesn't really understand." Alistair didn't look upset. He was staring at the drawing, a strange, unreadable expression on his face. He traced a finger over the wobbly letters. "Thank you for helping my mom." "He sees it backwards," Alistair said softly, almost to himself. "He thinks I helped you." "Well, you did," Maya said, her voice tight. "The job. It changed everything for us." He finally looked up at her, and the expression in his eyes was one of profound, almost painful loneliness. "He drew a heart," he stated, like it was a puzzling scientific fact. "It's just a kid's drawing," Maya rushed to say, wanting to shove the whole awkward moment into a box. "It doesn't mean anything. I'll take that." But he didn't hand it back. "May I keep it?" The question was so quiet, so oddly vulnerable, that it disarmed her completely. "Sure. I guess. Thank you." He carefully rolled up the drawing. "He's a good artist." He left, taking the crayon heart with him, leaving Maya standing in her office feeling like the world had tilted slightly on its axis. 2 days later, a large, flat package was delivered to her apartment. It was heavy, wrapped in plain brown paper. Her address was typed on a simple label. There was no return address, but she knew. With a sinking feeling, she opened it. Inside was the most elaborate, expensive robotics kit she had ever seen. It had multiple motors, sensors, a programmable computer brain. It was the kind of toy featured in magazines for gifted children, the kind that cost more than her old monthly rent. A small, elegant card was tucked inside. It read, in sharp, familiar handwriting, "For Leo." For the picture. Maya's first feeling wasn't gratitude. It was a wave of cold, sharp anger. Felt like a violation. This wasn't a thank you. It was a broadcast of power. It was him saying, "I see your son, and I can buy him the moon." It threatened to shatter the careful, normal life she was building. Leo would see this and think a spaceship had landed in their living room. It would warp his sense of the world, of what was normal, of what you got for being kind. She didn't cry. She got furious. She left the giant box gaping open on the table, got Leo to his sisters, and went straight back to the Kronos Tower. She didn't call. She didn't ask for an appointment. She walked, her back straight, past the startled executive assistant, and pushed open the door to his office. He was on the phone but hung up quickly when he saw her face. "Where is it?" he asked, a hint of a hopeful smile on his face. "Did he like it?" "That's the problem," Maya said, her voice low and shaking with controlled rage. She walked right up to his massive desk, not stopping until she was looking down at him. "You don't get to buy him. You don't get to buy his childhood or his art or his idea of what's right." The smile vanished. "It was a gift. A thank you. It's too much. There's a spotlight on us. We are not your charity project to make yourself feel better." The words spilled out, all the fear and pride she'd been holding back. "That kiss was to save a life. It wasn't to open a credit line with you for fancy toys. We are people, not a pet project you can throw money at." He flinched, her words hitting their mark. He looked, for a moment, genuinely shocked, then deeply ashamed. The authority drained from his posture. I didn't see it that way." "Of course you didn't," she shot back, but some of the heat left her voice. "You see a problem, you fix it with a purchase order. But you can't fix this. You can't repay me. Don't you get that? The debt isn't a bill. It's just a thing that happened. And my son drawing you a picture is a good thing. It's a human thing. And you turned it into a transaction." The silence in the room was thick. He looked down at his hands, then out the window. "You're right," he said finally, the words heavy. "I am out of practice with human things." Maya took a deep breath, her anger cooling into a weary sadness. "I need you to understand. We're doing okay. The job you gave me, that's enough. More than enough." That was the hand up. "This," she gestured vaguely toward her apartment, toward the giant toy. "This feels like you're trying to drag us somewhere we don't belong." "What would you have me do?" he asked, and he sounded lost. "Take it back," she said simply. "Explain it to him." "Explain?" "To Leo. You explain why it's too much. You look him in the eye and you talk to him like a person, not a recipient of your generosity. You come to our place and you take it back." He stared at her, horrified. The thought of facing a 7-year-old, of admitting a mistake, clearly terrified him more than any boardroom showdown. But Maya held his gaze. This was the real test, not of his wealth, but of his character. "All right," he whispered, the word sounding like it was dragged out of him. "All right, I'll come." That evening, in her modest living room with the second-hand sofa, the world's most awkward meeting took place. Alistair Thorne, in a simple sweater, looked enormous and out of place. Leo stared at him with wide, curious eyes. "Hello, Leo," Alistair said, kneeling down stiffly, which was somehow more painful to watch than if he just stood there. "I got your drawing. It is the best thing in my office. Did you like the robot?" Leo asked, pointing to the box. Alistair took a deep breath. "It is a very impressive robot. But I made a mistake. Grown-ups do that sometimes. I gave you a gift that was too big. It wasn't fair to your mom or to you. It might make other kids feel bad. So I need to take it back." Leo's face fell for a second. Then he processed the words. "So, you're not a friend who gives big presents?" Alistair glanced up at Maya, then back at Leo. "I hope I can be a friend. But friends do things together. They don't just send things. So, if your mom says it's okay, maybe instead of the robot, I could take you both to the planetarium this weekend. To look at the stars. As friends." Leo's eyes lit up. "The one with the big dome?" "Yes, that one." Leo looked at his mom. Maya, her heart in her throat, nodded slowly. "That sounds like a good trade." The relief on Alistair's face was profound. He hadn't bought his way out. He had talked his way through. He had faced the mess, and it was okay. After he left, taking the giant box with him, Leo hugged Maya's leg. "He's kinda weird, but nice weird." Maya looked at the closed door. The shift this time wasn't in policy or routine. It was deeper. He had crossed a threshold into their real, messy world, and he hadn't broken it. He had just stepped in. And for the first time, the connection between them felt real, fragile, and built on something much more complicated and solid than a kiss, or a job, or a toy. It was built on a hard truth, spoken in anger, and a humble, quiet apology a year later. The story of the janitor and the billionaire wasn't a story anyone told anymore. It had faded, replaced by newer bits of office gossip. Maya's life had settled into a shape that felt solid and real, and entirely her own. Her office wasn't the converted storage room anymore. She had a proper one with a window that looked out over a small park, not the steel and glass of other towers. The name on the door read, Community Outreach and Building Operations. It was a mouthful, but it fit. Her job had grown from fixing thermostats to running programs that connected Kronos Tech to the city around it. She set up apprenticeships for local high school kids in the building trades. She organized a partnership where the company's used but still good computers were refurbished and donated to community centers. The work used her knowledge of the building's inner workings and her understanding of the world outside its shiny doors. It was meaningful work. It was also just work. She still had bad days, frustrating meetings, and paperwork that made her want to groan. She wasn't living a fantasy. She was living a good, stable life. Her son, Leo, was 8, and his biggest concern was whether he'd get to play goalie at Saturday soccer. The planetarium trip had happened, and it had been quiet, a little awkward, but fine. Alistair Thorne had known an surprising amount about constellations. Since then, he'd sent a few postcards from business trips, a picture of the Sydney Opera House, a view of the Alps with short, simple notes for Leo. Saw this. Thought you'd like the shapes. It was a low-pressure, human touch. Leo had them pinned on his bulletin board. Maya's relationship with Alistair was the hardest thing for outsiders to understand, because there was no label for it. He wasn't her boss in the day-to-day sense. Her department reported to someone else. He wasn't her friend in the way her sister was a friend. They didn't hang out. They didn't chat about their weekends. But once or twice a month, often on late evenings when the tower was quieting down, he would appear in her office doorway. He'd knock on the frame. Got a minute? She'd look up from whatever proposal she was working on. For you? Always. Coffee? He'd nod, and she'd pour 2 mugs from the cheap machine she kept. He'd sit in the chair across from her desk, the one that was meant for visitors. He'd ask about her programs, not in a report to the CEO way, but with a genuine curiosity. Tell me about the computer initiative. Who does it help, really? And she'd tell him. She'd talk about the community center in the neighborhood where she grew up, and how the director, a tired but determined woman, was trying to teach digital skills to seniors. She'd talk about the kids who came in after school, and how having a reliable computer could mean the difference between finishing an assignment and falling behind. He'd listen, his sharp businessman's mind turning the human problem over, looking for angles she might have missed. Sometimes he'd offer a piece of advice, a contact, a way to cut through red tape. His power, she learned, could be a tool, not just a weapon or a wallet. She learned how to ask for it wisely. Sometimes the talk would drift. He'd ask about Leo. She'd ask carefully about his recovery. He was healthier now, playing tennis again, but he'd say things like, "The doctors say I'm fine, but you never forget the feeling, that slipping away." And she would nod because she had seen it in his eyes that night, and she never forgot it either. One evening in early winter, he came in looking more thoughtful than usual. The city lights were coming on outside her window, tiny sparks in the deep blue dusk. "Do you ever think about it?" he asked, cradling his mug. "That night. Sometimes," she admitted. "Usually when I'm tired. It pops into my head. What do you think?" She leaned back, considering. "I think I was scared out of my mind. I think I did the only thing my body could think to do. And I'm glad it worked." She paused. "Do you?" He was quiet for a long time. "I think," he said slowly, "that for years, I had built a world where I was the most important person in every room. My ideas, my money, my decisions. And then, on that floor, I was zero. I was nothing. Just a failing piece of biology. And the only thing that mattered in the entire universe was the kindness of a stranger." He looked at her, his gaze direct and unguarded. "You didn't see a billionaire. You saw a man who needed help. You shifted the entire world for me by doing that. Maya felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. You shifted my world too, she said simply. The job, the stability. It changed everything for me and Leo. A trade then, he said, a faint smile touching his lips. Not a trade, she corrected gently. A consequence. A good one. That was it. She realized. Their story wasn't about a kiss, or a rescue, or a dramatic romance. It was about consequences. One brave, desperate act had sent ripples out through both their lives, changing their courses forever. Her consequence was security, a voice, a purpose she loved. His consequence was a crack in his isolation, a reminder of his own humanity, a connection to a world beyond quarterly reports. They finished their coffee. He stood to leave, placing the empty mug on her desk with a soft click. The community center proposal, he said, back to business. I read it. The funding is approved. Do it your way. Thank you. He paused at the door. And Maya? Leo's birthday is next week. Isn't it? She felt a brief flicker of the old defensiveness. Yes. I was going to send a book about space. The one with the photographs from that new telescope. Is that acceptable? She smiled, a real easy smile. That's acceptable. He'll love it. He nodded, satisfied, and left. Maya turned her chair to look out the window. The sky was fully dark now, the city a grid of light. She thought about the woman she was a year ago, exhausted and invisible, mopping a floor she'd never owned. That woman was still here, inside her. But she was also so much more. The shift had been permanent, but it hadn't been a fairy tale ending. It had been a new beginning, built slowly, brick by brick, with hard conversations, quiet coffees, and a mutual respect that had grown in the fertile ground of a second chance. She had her life, he had his, and in the space between them was this understanding. A debt that could never be repaid, and so had become, instead, a foundation for something real. She saved his life. And in a way, by pulling him back into the messy human world, he had maybe saved something in hers, too. Not from death, but from a life of being unseen. She saved him with a kiss. They saved each other after with something harder and more lasting. Paying attention, she turned back to her desk, to the proposal for the community center computer lab. She had work to do, real work, and she couldn't wait to get started.